Coming up, Cam Thomas returned to the court for the Brooklyn Nets, and in doing so, begs the question, could he be the superstar that the Nets need? We break down all the reasons why it just might be a yes coming up next.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, my friends, it is the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. Over there, you'll find Doug Norrie. I'm Adam Armbrecht. We thank you, as always, for making us your first listen of the day. We are 100% free on all those great platforms. And let you know, today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA and use promo code all lowercase LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. And Doug, the season may not be going according to plan for the Brooklyn Nets, but it doesn't mean that a player's projections are not sky high right now in Cam Thomas as he came back from injury and reminded us just how good he might be.
Yeah, look, I mean, it's clear that the offense takes a different look when Cam Thomas is around. They have a second scorer. I talked about this at length at the post game the other day. And
I was after, yeah.
And, you know, it starts making the question about, like, you have to, where the Nets are right now, you have to start thinking about what the Cam Thomas ceiling is. And you start throwing around, like, where he can be in, like, the NBA pecking order. He's a polarizing player in terms of just how people view him, I think. And, you know, so we wanted to sort of examine, like, sort of where he is on the age curve, where, like, what some of his other comps might be. And, you know, establish this idea of, like, oh, can he be a superstar? To that, we would say that's probably going to be pretty tough. Probably for some things that are out of his control, by the way. And we'll get through some of those things. Overall, can he be a top, 40, 50 player in the league? I think there's probably a path for that. Are we ever talking about top 20? I would probably just say no. But, I mean, one, that's just really, really hard. Two, there's a couple of extenuating circumstances around him. But in general, when you have a guy that takes as many shots and can create and shoot and score sort of the way he can and only seems to be getting better in certain avenues, especially with ball distribution, it is worth it to kind of look about, like, what you think his ultimate ceiling is.
Yeah, and just as a reminder, this is a player who came into the league 2021, taken by the Nets 27th overall. We said this before. If you went back and redrafted, he certainly would have gone a lot higher. But coming into year number 3, he had just 6 starts under his belt. Yeah. He now has 35 and counting. And there's been this massive jump for him, obviously, mostly just from a playing standpoint and a minute share. He only averaged 16 and a half minutes over those first 2 seasons. Now, a player that by the end of this year will average 30-plus minutes a game. He's averaging 17 shots from the field a game, averaging almost 6 from beyond the arc, and knocking it down at a better percentage now that he's getting that expanded role. So that's why, as a 21.3 point per game scorer in the NBA in year number 3, we get to this question, right? Because all of a sudden, the sample size that we weren't sure about and whether or not he had this in him, and we need not debate what the organizational responsibility is that over the first 2 years. Now he's here, and now he's playing a lot, and you see how dynamic and impactful he is for this team, especially as they're currently constituted.
Yeah, I mean, he's going to end up leading the team in points per game for sure. He's not going to get there in raw points, but that's only probably just because of injury. If he had played the full season, even with the sort of like in and out of the starting lineup, he would have passed Mikal Bridges probably pretty easily here, but he's just like not going to probably able to play enough games. So then those guys are like easily 1-2 in terms of points. I think in terms of, looking at like sort of the role for him, one myth I want to sort of dispel early is that like being given a fair shake. Like, he's at this point now, anytime if you're bringing up the idea of like, the organization isn't like doing him justice here, he's been given a lot of sort of rope here. Like, he's taken a ton of shots. He's playing decent amount of minutes. And like, I think the part, if you're still hanging on to the idea that like the organization isn't allowing him to get to that point, I think that's more embedded in the past than it is in the present. Like, that is not really the case right now. He's got a full green light in the offense. That's clear. Like, he really can't shoot his way out of games. Right. And so, yes, I think that they probably definitely screwed up early with just like sort of being in and out, lack of communication, and not really understanding like when he was going to get playing time, when he wasn't. But I think that part is for sure over. Like, in terms of like growth just on the court, in terms of overall minutes, I'm not sure. Now we could talk about like if they put him in the best situation when he's on the court. That's a totally different conversation. But whether or not just like he's been giving a fair shake within the confines of the team that they have now, yeah, he's getting that chance for sure, and he deserves it. Like it's not like he should be getting a lot of shots, but I just don't want like to have the sins of the past like hanging on to our current evaluation of it, because there's plenty of other things to dive into.
Yeah, and there's some aspect of that falls onto situational, having a superstar driven team, all that different stuff. And we need not relitigate that. Before we talk specifically a little bit about his game, I actually have a quote from Kevin Ollie that I do want to touch on when we get to our second segment. As he is currently constructed, we'll say, as a human being, that's a weird way to phrase that. Given his height, his size, the position he plays, what's the number one deterrent that you would say stands between him and being a superstar when we look around the league and we think about the best players and some of the measurables that go along with that?
Yeah, he's small. Like so when you make that's really pretty easy, right? It's like it's at some point the NBA is kind of a math game when it comes to height, and the taller you are, it's easier to be better. and it's not just me saying that. Just look down the list of the very best players. So when we talk about superstars in the NBA, if we're making the list of just the superstar caliber, top 30, top 40 guys, a very common trait among those players, it's not all of them, but a very common trait is they're big. And if you are big and adept at using the basketball, whether it's shooting, getting to the rim, passing, it is just going to be a much easier process for you to be great. And again, just look at the list of the great players: Jokic, Giannis, Luka, Shea, 6'6", Embiid, Kawhi. This is like random. Tatum, Durant, right? Like the list of guys, Anthony Davis, LeBron. I'm going through like a random top 100 ranking here. So I'm not like ranking these guys in order of what I think they are. I'm just giving you the list of guys who would crop up when we were having this conversation, right? Like this is the group. And you can get to some smaller guys. Steph, obviously. Jamal Murray is, in there depending on where you want to think about it. But then like Jimmy Butler, and, I'm just keep going here. Anthony Edwards. Like these guys are all like of the bigger wing variety. When you get to the smaller players, and there are some, there's one defining trait between those guys, and they're on-ball point guards, right? And that's like Tyrese Halliburton. That's Jalen Brunson. That's guys who are have like sort of defined a role as an on-ball point guard operating an offense around which like the offense is sort of built with them as both a scorer and a ball distributor.
Right.
And I'm not sure we would put Cam, at least in this iteration of him, in that group either. Like he doesn't really play point guard. Now you can make the change, and we're going to go through some examples of guys that have, but as of like right now, like that would be really one of the biggest stoppers of like getting to this next level is like you kind of just have to be bigger. Right. And it's unfortunate, but that's just kind of how basketball works. Again, I know everyone's saying, well, all these examples, we're going to go through some of them for sure. Like we have some comps here of which that we can get them there. What I'm saying is that group is much smaller. It's when you get to 6'6", 6'7", 6'8", that's when it gets a lot easier to be part of that group, just because you can do a lot of different things that smaller players can't.
And that's what we're going to get into here with some examples, not only comps around the same size and what the starts of their careers look like. Also, as I mentioned there, a little quote from Kevin Ollie about Cam Thomas, and then specifically the other aspects of a game that frankly are easier when you are a bigger player and of a bigger stature. We'll get into that coming up here in just one moment.
All right, before we get to that, tell you our friends over at eBay Motors, passion, drive, and patience. What brings home the winning trophy? It's also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. They got superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, so much more. Whether into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. They got 122 million parts for your number one ride or die. You'll always find exactly what you're looking for. With eBay Guaranteed Fit, your parts guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or your money back. With eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers.
All right, so as we continue today on the Locked On Nets podcast, talking about one Cam Thomas and is he a star? Oh man, quote of the day. It should be from A Star Is Born. I won't use it, but it would have been a really easy layup for this particular conversation. Before we talk about those comps, I do just wanted to hit, because this was coming out of care of Eric Slater in that last post game on, this is Kevin Ollie speaking on Cam Thomas's trajectory in the NBA, quoting Ollie. 80% of basketball is not having the ball in your hands. So how can you impact that game during that time? And he's starting to do that, referring to Thomas. I think that'll unlock a lot of things with people talking about him in a higher echelon and not just scoring, but in the complete basketball players. He also went on to say, I definitely do think when he was asked, is he in a candidacy for the most improved player this season? I definitely do. What he did the other day, I thought that was one of his best games. It's been amazing to see his growth since I got here, how he's retaining things that we want him to do. So I know we're going to get into comps, but at least that conversation,
Yeah.
that sounds distinctly more like a head coach. And I'm not knocking Jacques Vaughn, but that sounds like a head coach that's trying to build up Cam Thomas, not maybe a head coach that was trying to put a lot of roadblocks that you want him to get over to prove himself. This looks like you're just saying, yes, he is. You're seeing it, and let's keep trying to get him to do more of that.
Yeah, definitively different. Sort of just overall feeling around the player than we've heard for a long time. Again, we just opened it up by saying they probably didn't get a fair shake early because you couldn't figure out why he wouldn't start at times, and when the team was built weird and there were some other issues, but they clearly kind of just didn't want to, right? So I think that, from this standpoint, he hasn't really probably even had enough court time to totally figure it out. Now, some people would say, well, maybe he wasn't doing himself any favors. I'm not sure what was happening behind closed doors here, in terms of just attitude, or if they were, at odds about different things. I don't really know. The numbers are the numbers. Like, he hasn't played tons and tons of minutes, you would think, relative to what it appears to be the skill level. Right. That I think we can probably agree on, which is why it was always very head scratching to us about what's going on here. He can't stick in the starting lineup. If we want to look at players around among this top group that would fit at least his sort of size, his measurables, along with role early in his career, there are two, and I don't think these guys necessarily even go stylistically the same, because I think, they just don't. If you just watch him play, they're not stylistically the same. And Cam is kind of a one-on-one when it comes to just how he plays compared to a lot of other guys. So I think from a style standpoint, it's actually kind of hard to find a lot of other guys that kind of approach the game and the way he gets into his shots like him. So these guys aren't that. But two guys in terms of size, sort of age curve around where they were, and role in the court would be guys like Donovan Mitchell and Bradley Beal, right? Around the same size, height and weight, both, early on in their career were off-ball shooting guards, at times could take over the offense, but not really. And if you look at their trajectory over the course of their career, you can start mapping out maybe a roadmap of where Cam can get, starting at a place sort of where he is now, which is lots of shots, no assists, right? Higher usage, not incredibly efficient. I mean, he's really not efficient at all. And over the course of the season. But these are two guys, when you look at them, sort of where they were and where they've gone, I do think you can start telling a little bit of a story about how he could get there, especially if you look back at their age 22 seasons.
Yeah, out of those two players, I know you're going to go a little bit more into their specific situations for each one of them, but it's funny now with where Beal is at this point of his career. If you look back, I'd say, do I really want a Bradley Beal? Right now, it matters what team you're playing on, who else is playing with him, etc. But I don't know if I want that player for 10 years, 12 years on my team. And that could be biased by watching what his teams were or were not able to do. Right now is maybe a third wheel on a team with Kevin Durant and with Booker. Well, that starts to make a little bit more sense. The other side of it, the Donovan Mitchell piece, why you can like that is because he came in with that pedigree of having defensive value. And that's, I wonder if right now I would say, not stylistically, but I lean as Cam being more in line with Beal, because the defensive end of the floor is going to be a wait and see, or what can you rise to? If you don't have some of that two-way ability that Mitchell brings, do you inevitably feel like then you are capped? You are capped as an elite scorer, but not a guy that you could rely on to be the number one, or as we're talking about, to be a superstar, to be in that discussion, probably when it comes down to crunch time and critical moments and making big stops or making a play that is beyond just making that bucket that you need.
Well, a reminder there, your superstar status about how you affect the team usually is
Has
only
nothing to do with
basically
defense. Yeah.
is basically just contract related. If
Oh,
like
okay. Okay. Yeah.
if these
Yeah.
guys are your highest paid supermax players, then you might be a little bit in trouble, right?
Mhm.
But like, so I think that that's kind of couched a little bit in that, where it's like you only view these guys differently based on how much they cost you and your inability to possibly get other guys. Like that's kind
Right.
of like,
But
and so I think just from like a skill set standpoint, which I probably will just keep it here, I think you'd happily take Bradley Beal. Right now, the negative connotation around Beal is like the best player on a terrible team. Well, that's the Wizards' fault.
yeah,
That's
I
not
know. It's like even
necessarily
when you're saying, you're like, now come on, Washington.
that's the Wizards' fault. Like
Yeah.
that's like they drafted like crap for years. You know, like that. Like so they. It's hard for me to blame Beal for that. And then with Mitchell, I mean, we're seeing him sort of step into this like up next, clearly like next realm this year. And I think, you know, you can start even maybe telling yourself a story about like sort of his skill set. But in terms of like comps, in their age 22 seasons, like these guys are pretty close, you know, in terms of just like overall
Mhm.
efficiency. They weren't crazy efficient. They took a lot of shots. You know, true shooting Cam, true shooting. I had it right here. Yeah. 55% true shooting for Cam this year. Beal in his age 22 season was like basically the same number, 55 or 50. It's like 54.7, like actually literally the same, 54.7 for the both of them. Mitchell was a little bit under. Team was probably a little bit, well, they weren't worse than Brooklyn is now. The Beal teams were actually better, and we'll get to like sort of some key differences around who they were playing with. But
Mm.
overall, like just sort of overall efficiency standpoint, look, NBA landscape a little different. Like those guys are, you know, we're 5, 6, 7 years removed from those guys being in their age 22 seasons. But there's a lot of similarities there in terms of just like overall assist percentage. Cam's a little lower, usage. Cam's a little higher. Like he's allowed to take more shots than those guys were earlier in their careers for sure. But in terms of like overall, I would say it's like closer than I thought it would be in where they were. And one other thing about those other two guys, in their age 22 seasons, they had already played more, like decent amount more minutes than he had. Like they had already been they got into the league and they got to play a lot right away. And Cam
Right.
didn't. Like he did not get to play a lot in his first couple years. He played 1,100 minutes his rookie year, and he played 950 minutes last year. Beal in his first year, over 1,700 minutes, 2,500 minutes in his second year. Like way beyond.
Right.
Mitchell,
It's almost matched
2,600.
his first 2 seasons in his rookie.
Mitchell
rookie year
played
alone.
more minutes in his first season than Cam played in his first 2 seasons combined by 600.
And
Right?
that's
Like
a
these
little bit
guys.
of that, you know, the Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving era stunting a different version of it. When we talk about the other 2 players, it was bad teams at the time. You come in, you're going to go, you're going to play, right? So there's a little bit that pulls back at least where we think Cam Thomas can be relative to the minutes and the time he's had on the court.
Yeah, look, and we talked about this. We talked this with Claxton too. It was like,
Yeah.
you know, you think about Claxton having been in the league year, which I said this last year. You know, you think about having been in the league a long time, but in terms of minutes, he was in year like 1.25 or something like that because he barely played.
Right.
Like Cam, we could be saying something very similar. He's in year 3, but in terms of minutes, he's probably a guy with his skill set. He's probably only in year 1.5 or something like that. And I'm fudging those numbers a little bit, but it's instructive in how to think about like how much time he's actually had in the court, which is to say not that much. Right? Like he just hasn't gotten to play a lot. And the really sometimes the only way to grow is to play. It's hard. You have to earn playing time. You have to have teams where it's going to make sense, and you have to have you have coaches that want to play you. You have to have all these other things sort of work out for you. But in Cam's case, he just hasn't really been on the court very much relative to how we're talking about him. And that's the other point. Like, you know what I mean? Like lots of players don't have lots of court time. They stink. Right. Like he doesn't. And so relative to how we're talking about him and the groups that we might want to start putting him in, his minutes totals are way lower than some of these other guys.
Right. And then you've heard this from the fan base as well, that he should be playing more, needed to be playing more. And when you see the talent on the court, it obviously feels like you want to see that trend in that direction. So we talked about the comps here. We've talked about what it means to maybe be one of the bigger players, wherever he's going to cap himself in terms of his superstar eligibility. Coming up next, what does it mean for the Brooklyn Nets? What does it mean for the Brooklyn Nets with Mikal Bridges and the path that they seemingly are going to forge moving forward? We dive into that coming up next.
All right, before we get to that, tell you about our friends over at Prize Picks. Prize Picks Daily Fantasy made so easy. It's demon time on Prize Picks, baby. You can win up to 100 times your money with as few as 4 correct picks. That's right. You can turn $10 into $1,000 over on Prize Picks. The Demons and Goblins, the newest and most exciting way to play. These squares marked with red demons or green goblins are going to give you different payouts depending on how, if you're going more or less on those different Prize Picks projections. Some are going to be a little easier to hit, some a lot harder because that's all you're doing on Prize Picks. You're going more or less on the Prize Picks projections, and you can win, like I just said, 100 times your money. All you're doing on Prize Picks, you're going with basketball, it's points, rebounds, assists, blocks, steals, more or less on those numbers. You're not wrangling with salaries. You're not going against sharks in the water. Prize Picks took daily fantasy and made it so easy. You go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA. Use the code LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. That's prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA. Code LockedOnNBA. First deposit match up to $100. Prize Picks. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy. And did you know that even if you have a 401k for retirement, you can still have an IRA? Robinhood has the only IRA that gives you a 3% boost on every dollar you contribute when you subscribe to Robinhood Gold. But get this, now through April 30th, Robinhood is even boosting every single dollar you transfer in from other retirement accounts with a 3% match. That's right, no cap on the 3%. Robinhood Gold gets you the most for your retirement thanks to their IRA with a 3% match. This offer is good through April 30th. Get started at robinhood.com/boost. Subscription fees apply. And now for some legal info. Claim as of Q1 2024, validated by Radius Global Market Research. Investing involves risk, including loss. Limitations apply to IRAs and 401ks. 3% match requires Robinhood Gold for 1 year from the date of first 3% match. Must keep Robinhood IRA for 5 years. The 3% matching on transfers is subject to specific terms and conditions. Robinhood IRA available to U.S. customers in good standing. Robinhood Financial LLC, member SIPC as a registered broker-dealer.
All right, so as we tie a bow on the Locked On Nets episode today, talk about Cam Thomas. Superstar? Yeah, what the heck? Why not? I mean, you said at the top there. I mean, I think it's possible. And like we talk about with players of his stature, it takes a lot in order to get there because the efficiency that you talk about, that actually is a big factor in his success. You need to be able to start doing it at such an efficient clip that you become that type of, whether it's Damian Lillard, we talk about Donovan Mitchell in some of these comps. But if we relate it back to the Nets now, and we saw this the other night, it helps Mikal Bridges to have Cam Thomas on the floor and to have him be a guy that defenses need to pay attention to. Is there a hierarchy where Cam Thomas can be the second best player behind other superstar X to be brought in here, getting Mikal Bridges down to pecking order number 3, letting him serve a role that feels more commensurate with where his skill set is? Or are we maybe in this episode backing ourselves into a corner of saying, boy, Cam Thomas, he is electric. He could be a fringe superstar talent. And if he is your superstar talent, then maybe you're not going to win a lot.
Okay, so let me back up.
Correlate to him, right? This isn't a knock on him. It's just a reality.
Well, let me actually go back to these other guys because I think it will be instructive around like what the Nets don't have now and what these other guys, specifically Mitchell and Beal, had early in their careers. And I think this is going to be, and I'm not sure this is going to, I think it's going to kind of answer your question in a slightly roundabout way. So one big difference that Mitchell and Beal had early on was that they were off-ball point guards, but they actually played with good point guards. And if you look back at Mitchell's early career, like his age 22 season, he played with Ricky Rubio as the point guard. Like Rubio started like 68 games there that year. Rubio was like a consummate point guard when healthy, right? Like ball distribution first, saw a lot of the angles. Like that was what he came into the league to do. And then he went basically from Rubio right to Mike Conley. And so like Mitchell early in his career was able to play off ball with guys who like just were considered very, very good point guards. Beal played with John Wall early in his career. Now, whatever happened to John Wall's career, early in his career, John Wall was like an awesome point guard, right? Averaged more than 10 assists a game. Wall was at 10 plus assists a game in Beal's age 22 season, right? Beal had like no assists. He was all shots. And actually at the time, he was and he's kind of like Cam now. If you looked at like his shots to assist, or excuse me, scoring to assist rates, I mean, it was like among the highest in the league. It was all scoring. That's all he really did. Cam did too. But I think it probably helped those guys earlier in their careers to play with guys who understood how to sort of facilitate an offense into getting shots in good places, right?
Mm.
The Nets don't have that at all. And I do think a guy like Cam, because I think a lot of times we're like, oh, put Cam on the ball, put Cam on the ball. That would have its drawbacks early in his career now for a guy that like really hasn't done it. We've seen these other guys get there, but you just have to remember that early in their career, they got to play with these like really, really good point guards that could sort of connect an offense, that could settle things down, that could understand sort of what needed to be done. And it's unfortunate, but Thomas just doesn't really have that, right? Like they don't have it. Like they don't have anyone. He has not played with anyone close. He's not played with anyone close to a point guard level like that. Harden would have been the best comp, but they didn't really play that much together.
No, and I was going to say, not to bring up the name that need not be mentioned, but that's why when we talked about why was Ben Simmons valuable playing with Cam Thomas, we always theorized for that reason, right? On ball, only wants to distribute and facilitate and get you into a good spot for a player that you want to keep off ball for stretches of it. And that's not even pure point guard. Like, that's this hybrid player, blah, blah, blah. I don't want to drag him into this discussion, but I agree with you though, so now to go back to it, players you need to have around them. Well, there you go. So when we talk about going this offseason and some are saying, go get Donovan Mitchell. Well, you're potentially talking about creating a weird dynamic there with Cam Thomas. No matter who you go and get as your first superstar, though, then the real question you're asking is there another guy you go get? Is there the pure point guard value that you go find to bring in here to make sure that it continues to put Cam on the successful path? Like, would that – so again, I'm asking these questions like extemporaneously because I don't have the answer. So it's like, okay, do you go to this offseason and say, do you go to this offseason taking into account that Cam Thomas needs a pure on-ball point guard to maximize what his value is? Do you think the Brooklyn Nets are looking at him right now as, hey, he could be as critical to our future success as we've been treating Mikal Bridges, right? Like, we're acting like Mikal Bridges is a part of this key core going forward. Well, maybe we need to make sure that we're associating it around Cam Thomas and what he needs to be the best version of himself going forward.
Well, I mean, based on their current roster, they'd be nuts not to. He doesn't make any money, and he's like one of the few guys that can score. So they'd be crazy to like not view it that way, at least for another season, because there's like they don't have anyone that can really come in functionally and do anything close to the same. How do we know? Well, we've been watching it all year, right? Like, so they don't have anyone like that. Now, whether they have the scratch to actually be able to get someone like that, I don't know about that, right? Like, they're really hamstrung here in terms of money. If they're going to make Claxton a key offseason signing and they're stuck with the Simmons contract, we could just be kind of looking at the team again. Now, at that point, you're going to have to decide, is like Dennis Schroeder the guy? Look, Schroeder's better than, in terms of like pure point guard, probably a little bit better than they had, but still probably, light years behind some of these other guys that we just mentioned. Go ahead.
What's funny too, we talk about adding it, and we're going to try to tie a bow on this conversation around Cam Thomas. We obviously agree that he's excellent. He has the chance to be there, but you have to do right by him. As by the way, you have to do right by any player that you think can be a superstar. We mentioned about Beal earlier. Guess what Washington did? Everything the wrong way, effectively, to maybe accentuate his value. When I was looking at it, ironically, a guy like Tyus Jones, who went to the Washington Wizards, who now all of a sudden flourished this season, is averaging over 7 assists per game. But then you back yourself in, you round yourself back in the same problem. Well, look at Tyus Jones' size, right? And then you think about your backcourt and you think about the defensive pairing and that problem that it creates. So all of these things still come back to, I think, what we say at the top about size matters here. And the decisions you make around a player like Cam Thomas or anyone of that stature the margins on those become pretty thin, I think. Like, either you hit them correctly, you get some other really elite superstar talents, or you hit the right complementary pieces perfectly. And to your point, the Brooklyn Nets have a lot of question marks and a lot of contracts on their books that are going to make it hard to reconfigure things and maybe maximize Cam over the short term. By the way, he's still he's doing a great job maximizing himself as it stands right now, because guess what? We're having the conversation if he could be a superstar as we dwindle our way down a very sub 500 season for this team.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that the key here is like, too, they should treat him at least like he can be one. I think this is what I would say is they should treat him like he can be one. Because, like, one, they don't have anyone else they can really kind of treat like this. And two, he's like a guy that's in the door now. And sometimes finding these guys is tough, with the understanding that, A, this stuff all becomes relative to how much money you make. So you have to make hard decisions later on about like how much these guys are worth. Like, you mentioned the Wizards, look at Jordan Poole. Look at like the bloom fell off that rose like really, really fast, right? Smaller off-ball guard. All of a sudden can't make any shots. And now it's kind of like really bad,
Yeah.
right? And I'm not saying Cam's headed in that direction. I'm just saying we picked out the two best versions of this, I think, in Mitchell and Beal. There's lots of versions where it looked like it was going to be okay, and then it just wasn't, right? Like something just didn't get figured out, and now it's like a huge problem at much more expensive cost. I don't think he's like at risk of getting there, but I just at least want to highlight that there are other guys that we thought differently about 18 months ago, right? And like that have changed now.
And by the way, here's the great news. Going and getting a really good point guard for this team helps everybody. Like, it can help Cam Thomas take the next step. It's also something you just kind of need on this roster no matter what. So you can do the both and find a way to see if you can have Thomas take that next big step and also improve your roster as a whole.
All right. Much appreciated, everyone. Again, that's coming around here, even through a rougher net season. That's all right. We're going to roll all the way through the end of the season, no matter what, every single day talking Brooklyn Nets. Go to WeGotNets.com, grab a free ebook, some Nets stories. Maybe Cam Thomas will end up a story. He probably will be. So many huge scoring games. How could we not? Like, especially that stretch a couple years ago where he actually lit the world on fire. Go to WeGotNets.com, grab that free ebook.
Always doing what is right. It will gratify half of mankind and astound the other. Why that is Marky Twain.
Oh, one of the all-time great poets. We're back again tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.
Basketball.